Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be with you again. We've had some great shows the last few weeks, and this one's just the same. It's called The War Journal, a warrior story about surviving the most agonizing pain imaginable. Quote, in combat, you can fight. You know your enemy, and you have the training, skills, and equipment to eliminate threats to yourself or your teammates who are your family, close quote. After we leave military service and move on with our lives, we face an evolving world and situations for which most of us are not trained to fight and survive in. That's the realization that many combat veterans deal with daily, even as we're under the stresses of our past, a condition also known as post traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. My guest this week is releasing his new book, The War Journal, in just a few days. It is his combat veteran story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Jim Sisko is the CEO of Inoto Global Incorporated, specializing in surveilling, analyzing, assessing, and messaging about risk in the 21st century world that we inhabit these days. Jim, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, my friend. If I can get this switch thrown here, you'll be in. Outstanding. Good to see you, brother.
You also. Good to be back.
Hey, I'm excited. I was excited to hear about the book. We've known each other quite a few years now and worked together. And I've always known you. There was a lot more to you under the surface than a lot of people realized. And so I'm very excited to get you on to talk about the book and its upcoming publication on March or February 24th. So not very long from now. And we will get the stuff out there, promote it, and all of those kinds of things as we do it. But I got a question for you, man. Why'd you keep a journal in the first place in your deployment?
I have no idea. So quite honestly, I got you know how you're on deployment. I got a care package from a friend of mine, and in the care package, typical stuff: beef jerky, foot powder, baby wipes, and there was a journal. It was a black book, and in the note in the care package, it said, "Do me a favor, and can you please write in the journal so when you come home, I can see the world through your eyes." And I was like, and there was the black book and the pen, and I got it right before Christmas. So my first journal entry was on Christmas Day, and for me, it was just something I did. It was kind of like a promise to a friend, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. Not a lot of thought put into it. I just would write, when it was appropriate.
So this Christmas was the Christmas before the kickoff of Operation Desert Storm in January of the following year?
So we arrived in theater in November, and we had been there for so it was the Christmas before the kickoff of the war.
Yeah. So where were you located when you started writing in the journal?
Right. I think we were in Camp 15. There was a big base where a lot of a staging area where all the troops are located. We were still at Camp 15 when I received the care package and started journaling. And shortly after Christmas, we started to move forward, and we established forward operating bases, which we talk about in the book. We didn't maintain one position. We moved frequently, which created some challenges, to put it mildly.
There were quite a few challenges with that war. As a matter of fact, my first war was actually Operation Just Cause in Panama, the December prior to that. I think if my timeline is still fresh in my head here, and then we all got involved in the Desert Shield piece of this starting in August, and we're doing all kinds of things. And but then it seemed that to be like everything got in place and everybody settled down to a routine, and then bam, Operation Desert Storm under General Schwarzkopf. Did you ever meet Schwarzkopf while you were there?
No, we were always forward deployed. So the times that he came and visited, we were out, out forward. So never really had the opportunity to go back and hang out for a prolonged period of times back in the rear with the gear.
Yeah, because were you Force Recon in the Marines?
I was recon battalion at the
Okay.
time. It was before they had MARSOC, and we had recon battalion, and force recon was just being stood up.
Okay. So you were really at the the beyond the front. You guys were doing ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance before the fight started. So you were really out there, right?
So we were off the northwest border of Kuwait, and we moved, every day or two.
Yeah.
And we did a couple missions inside Kuwait before the ground war started, a couple days before the ground invasion.
What was that like?
It was a logistic nightmare in a way, and some of the missions kind of really weren't suited for recon. Um,
Hmm.
so there was a lot of challenges, and I talk about in the book about some of the challenges that we face and how not and I say this in the opening. We hadn't fought a war in the desert since World War II, and the last
Right.
war that we fought in the Marines was in Vietnam, and then the last real engagement we had was Beirut. So we had a sour taste in our mouth for Beirut. We were not prepared to fight in a desert environment, and if you think about reconnaissance and our traditional missions, and then you try to put us into a desert environment where it's very fast paced, very fluid, dynamic environment, in Humvees, across large open areas, really wasn't suited for our typical mission set. So it was very challenging.
Yeah, it was challenging for everybody, man. I remember at the kickoff of Desert Shield, we got a call to take three KC-135As to a base in the Northwest to pick up a whole security forces group, which is like the Air Force's infantry. And those aircraft, the A models, weren't designed really to carry large amounts of troops and their equipment that they needed to get there. But we sent bombers and fighters over to Riyadh and Jeddah without taking any security with them right off the get go. So everybody just sucked it up and said, "Well, we got to get this done." And I think that's the way the whole thing was. And then when the combat operations kicked off, the planning was pretty well done, and execution went pretty went really well for from the Air Force's perspective, and I think they did a pretty good job of prepping the battlefield for you guys. So you kept a journal, and now we're going to publish it. Why, after 30 years, it's been 30 plus years, uh, should you publish it now if you've kept it private all this time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and let me answer, but just truthfully. So when I got out of the Marine Corps, it was right after Desert Storm. I came back from Desert Storm. 7 days later, I was out of the Marine Corps, and I went to college, went through the PLC program. I had intentions of going back in the Marine Corps, and it didn't work out for whatever reasons, and I joined the Navy. I look back now and what happened in Desert Storm, I really wasn't mature enough. I wasn't, old enough to understand what happened to me and how it really impacted me. And I just chose to ignore a lot of the things that happened. It was very traumatic, some of the things that occurred. And instead of learning from those, I kind of just put them in a compartment and threw them, in the shelf. And I did the same thing with the journal. It went into, you know how when you come back from deployment, you have your
Hmm.
military things, you throw them in a box, and they sit for years, and then you unpack them and you look at them, put them on a bookshelf, and that's what happened with the war journal. And the reason that I, uh, you know, actually read the war journal was, I've shared with a lot of people, not a lot of people, but I'm kind of private. But I went through a divorce and going through a custody
Hmm.
battle with, to see my kids. And as part of that, I had to go through a psychological evaluation. I had to take a parenting course. I had to go through anger management training. And as part of the anger management training, I talked to a therapist, and he's like, "Hey, have you ever journaled? We suggest journaling." And it was funny. I went back that night and I was going through the bookshelf and I pulled the journal, the war journal, off the bookshelf, and I sat down and I just started reading it. I read the entire thing, from cover to cover, and I got done, and I was really, I was overcome by like my emotions and some of the things because I had forgotten all of that, and I put it away,
Hmm.
and so what happened next was a friend of mine, I went to a friend of mine and he does all our graphics design work. He transcribed everything word for word and then he put it into a PDF and he put some pictures on it and he made it look really pretty for me. And so I was doing a podcast about my situation, and the host of the podcast, it came up in the podcast, and I sent it to her, and she sent it to a publicist, and the publicist got back to me, really quickly and said, "You have a #1 bestseller." And I was just like, "No, okay, whatever, great, yeah, sure, okay." And,
That's big words.
yeah,
Yeah.
we started work on it, and 6 months later, we finished the book a couple weeks ago, and it'll be out for publication next week, and that's kind of the story behind it.
That's fantastic, man. I think that all of the lessons learned about warfare really have not come from historians and those kind of folks. It's from the people on the battlefield that experience that, being able to write about it. So I really admire that. I've had a long term goal of writing my own book, but I just haven't been able to do it. So it takes special talent to be able to realize that it should be done, and then have the wherewithal to go ahead and get it done. What do you want people to, what value do you want folks to get out of this book that you're putting out?
Yeah, before I answer that, I want to just say one thing. I don't want people to think this book is, the typical war genre book. There I
Yeah.
was, killing people and shooting people. I mean, everyone who knows about Desert Storm, it was 72 hours,
Yeah.
96 hours at the most. So it wasn't a lot of combat. What the book really talks about, how Desert Storm was different than the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that we're used to now. It really talks about, you got to think this is back in the 1990s. There's no cell phones and internet. The way wars fought now. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan. You go out on a patrol and then you come back at night and you sit in your air conditioned 2-man room, and you can get on the internet and FaceTime your girlfriend or wife or significant other. Back then, we had a phone center, and it was a line usually like mile long, and 2 hours you had to wait, and just to get a
I
phone call
remember.
home. Yeah, there was no green bean coffee shop and massage parlors and the modern conveniences of
Wait a
war.
minute.
Like,
I didn't see any massage parlors when I was deployed in the desert. Come on.
really?
Are you
After
are you blowing
Bagram,
smoke?
no, Bagram Air Force Base, and then on ISAF headquarters in Kabul, there was a 24-hour massage parlor, and they had like 6 women from Kyrgyzstan doing massages all the time. So anyway, so the book isn't the typical like war book talking about tactics or talking about operational things. It's really talking about the environment that we lived in, the stresses of constant moving. And going back to what you said, from the Air Force perspective, at the strategic and operational level, everything worked perfect. From my perspective on the ground, it was a clusterfuck at the tactical level. The operational level was, not that great, but at the strategic level, it was really good. There was a great plan, and that executed well. But at the operational and tactical levels, it was foobar. So when you look at the book, and from my perspective, I'm talking about all these things, and then specific events that occurred while I was deployed that had a very significant impact on my life, my identity, my development, and how those events shaped my future. I made some really bad mistakes in my life, and I can admit to those. And if I had learned from the war journal and those critical lessons that I had experienced when I was younger and brought those forth in my life, I probably wouldn't have made those mistakes. Not that I regret the things I've done, but it's a learning experience. And I wrote the book because when I read the War Journal, I was like, wow, if I had just taken these lessons and brought those forward in my life, I would have, been in a better position in some ways. So
Yeah,
that's
and
why I
those,
wrote it.
Jim, let me interrupt you for just a second. Those lessons learned that I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation, folks, are from the human perspective. War is a human endeavor. It's the harshest thing that humans participate in, uh, and it's that those lessons learned that I was talking about, not necessarily how you move on the battlefield and blah blah blah. So I'm agreeing with you there. I want to make sure people understand that. And FUBAR, if you haven't seen Saving Private Ryan, is effed up beyond all recognition. Anyway, so that is a great uh, point, Jim, about if you'd only been able to bring those lessons learned throughout the rest of your life, over the next 30 plus years, maybe you wouldn't have made some of the mistakes you made beyond your military career, if I understood that correctly, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the other thing is, I've spoken with, I'm a very private individual when it comes to certain things, and really writing the War Journal and publishing the War Journal forced me to talk to other people and hear their stories. And when I shared like the intro to the War Journal with them, they connect on a personal level with my experiences, and it really is for me. The feedback that I've gotten so far is awesome, because I'm not here to make to be on Oprah Winfrey show and
Right.
be on the New York Times bestseller list. If one person reads the War Journal and it saves them from making similar mistake, or it brings them out of a very dark period of their life, or and they share it, that's my success.
Yeah, that's the real reason why I wanted to particularly to get you on is you and I've worked together on suicide prevention among veterans. We know what the how big that issue continues to be. As a matter of fact, every single day, 22 a day was the mantra for a long time. I think the government's saying something like 17, but when you talk to the average troop on the street, they don't agree with that. They think it's still just as high as it's been since we first started working together on it several years ago. So that's what makes this book particularly interesting. And the other thing is that I get from it is, and I'm not going to give the book away, but being able to apply those things to civilian life, people that haven't been in the military or in wars and those kind of things, and because the country's been through some traumatic things over the past few years, not necessarily like shooting type stuff, but the population has been had trauma induced upon them by the actions of even the government during the pandemic and everything. So I think this would be a useful story as you lay it out. You said that you talk about your journal entries, but then you provide the context and and the human lessons that you get from that. And if somebody's reading this book that's a non-military person today in our country, I think that might be helpful because we see things like suicide rates amongst the civilian population. I believe is increasing, especially amongst our young people, isn't it?
It is, and you bring a good point up. I didn't write this book just for veterans or
Right.
active duty military. The life lessons are very broad, but very powerful. I talk about faith in God and religion. I talk about love, and one of the things I say is, find a woman out there that you can love forever and never need another again. I talk about betrayal. I talk about friendship. I talk about education. I'm a big believer in education, and one of the things I wrote in the War Journal. And you think about this: you have this 20-year-old raw, angry, immature Marine who is in special forces, and all I want to do is fight and kill people. And I'm writing things that, when I look back, these were the wisdom in the writing was of a man who had lived an entire life, but yet it was raw and it was not sophisticated. And when I read it, I was like, wow. When I wrote about education, I said seek education because it can never be taken away from you. And things like that. And then when you read it, 30 years later, you're like, wow, that was pretty amazing. And coming from a person who, when I grew up, my father, and I don't want to be like play the card. Oh, I was abused or this and that. So many people do that, but he was very abusive verbally. Physically,
Hmm.
never laid a hand. I mean, aside from the typical strap or wooden spoon, growing up as a child, but it
Yeah.
wasn't physically abusive. But he was very verbally abusive. He used to, say, "Hey, you're going to work on the back of a garbage truck. You're never going to amount to anything. You're stupid." And I brought that forward, through my entire life. And finally, when I was in my graduate course, getting my master's degree, and I didn't study. I was, dating and flying around and didn't really care. It was a kind of a weird point in my life. And the class valedictorian came up to me and said, "Hey, Jim, can I talk to you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" He's like, "You're 1/10 of a point below me. I study all the time. And what is going on? I mean, you're always out drinking and having fun and partying. You never study." And it was at that point that I realized, I had been told all these things my entire life, and I finally realized that I was fairly intelligent. And these are kind of like, this is an example of the life lesson. And I talk about education not like going to school. I mean, if you learn a trade, if you become a plumber or a carpenter, or if you read on your own, just reading books on your own or watching YouTube videos, not, to learn things, that is what I, value in education. And part of that talks about faith. And some people are very uncomfortable talking about it, and some people wear it on their sleeves. And for me, I'm kind of private, but it also helped me understand, how to establish, my relationship with God and faith, because I write in the war journal one entry, and I write, "Thank you, God, for listening. For once in my life, I thought you were there." And there's very funny stories in the book. Like, we had a chaplain fly out to our forward operating base on a Sunday morning, and it was hilarious. He comes out in his camouflage, and he had his, his get up, and we stack
Hmm.
MRE crates up, and we make a little altar for him, and he just starts, delivering this powerful speech about our righteous indignation to defeat the enemy and kill our enemy. And he gets done and gives some communion and takes a couple Hail Marys, and bang, out on the CH-46, and that was it.
Uh, didn't even offer to pray with you, huh?
That's it. There you go. Give you
Uh,
our Father, and off he went.
yeah, it's 21st century and 20th century American. I call it religiosity. It's different for everybody, but it's interesting that as a 20-year-old, you were even thinking about faith at all. That entry is critically important from my perspective, as the 20-year-old Jim is facing combat for his first time, and is bringing everything that makes him Jim Cisco to that fight, and you actually take the time to pray, because you mentioned that in the write-up, in the entry, and then B, to document it. I mean, for somebody that's 20 years old, I don't think I would have been documenting that kind of stuff, even though I grew up in church and am a Christian myself, but I just don't know if I would have been thinking that way. So it's very interesting, and I think it's very powerful, as you said, for somebody that's a non-military person to be reading about these kinds of things, because everybody deals with faith differently, as you mentioned, and everything. But people should be more open to talk about it politely, not in an angry way, and challenge themselves to dig deeper. And I think you did. I think that displays that you did that, man. The What are some of the other things that you want to talk about to tease people on the book a little bit more, and why they should get this book and read it?
Yeah, and this is like when I thought about coming on the podcast, how much leg do I show? I don't want to give away too much, but I want to be able to entice people. And I look at it in two ways. There's some very funny events that occurred, and those events, and I'll tell one story in particular, and kind of like why it's entertaining. But throughout the book, there's these lessons that you continually are reinforced, and then to the end of the book, I just lay out the five critical life lessons that I think are important. There was a lot of lessons learned there, but I distill them into these five. And excuse me, the one that I'll talk about, on the podcast, and the one that I think will resonate with people the most is relationships and love, and for me, I was, and this might be a little long, but I'll try and get through it quickly. I grew up in a divorced family. My father had married 3 times. My mother was married 4 times. She was very flamboyant. I grew up and was raised by my father and his parents. So basically, my grandparents raised me. So I grew up without a mother figure in my life. And I never realized that until later on in life, that growing up without a mother in my life had an impact on me. I really didn't know how to express my emotions. I didn't know how to interact with women in a relationship way. And I really looked at women and, from seeing how my father interacted, very male chauvinistic, and I formed my opinions and beliefs. So I didn't know how to have established relationships with women in the right way. And I didn't know how to communicate, and I didn't know how to express my emotions. So what happened in Desert Storm was I was dating a woman before I went over to Desert Storm, and some of the things that happened in Desert Storm made me realize, how my interactions with women, and not that they were inappropriate, but how my relationships weren't right. And I'll be very matter of fact. I used women for pleasure. I used intimacy and sex to satisfy this emotional void that I had, and I could never really connect on on an emotional level. And it really wasn't. And even during my marriage, I never really had this emotional connection with my wife, and it wasn't until after the divorce and reading the war journal and actually dating a woman that I really experienced those things. And I look back now and I can say I have only felt love for a woman twice in my life, and with 2 women, which is a shame because I squandered so many great opportunities with wonderful women, and some of them are pissed off at me, and some of them really, the ones who know me, like the woman who gave me the war journal, Christy Mitchell. We're still friends today, and I have other women friends who we have a great relationship and great friendship. But that was one of the biggest things, is understanding, and coming to grips with, my emotions, and being able to express them and being able to talk about them and how they relate vis-a-vis during women.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the introduction of the book that you never dealt with issues from your childhood or your time in the military, and reviewing the journal and going through the process of writing the book, that's helped you decompartmentalize those feelings and come to grips with that, and make you a better man. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, and it wasn't easy. I'm not going to lie to you. You come from the special forces community where you don't talk about your feelings or your emotions. I describe myself, in my younger years as, hard as woodpecker lips. We used to have, I was 180 pounds of spring steel and sex appeal, totally Kevlar. And that gets ingrained into your identity, and you don't, even when I retired from the military, and I've spoken with so many veterans, and so many veterans from the Gulf War time. Nobody submitted a claim for PTSD.
Watch the rest of this interview on Red Voice Media Premium using the link below. Completely uncensored and ad-free. Not a member yet? Try it for $1.